We are. For last year.
Good morning. I'd like to call the September 14th meeting of the CVTA Finance Committee to order. And basically, before we do the certification of quorum, I do want to welcome Dr. Newbill as sitting in as an alternate for Mayor Stoney today. With that, Ms. Firestone, would you certify the quorum?
Yes, sir. Chesterfield County, Mr. Carroll.
Here.
Hanover County, Chair Peterson.
Here.
Henrico County, Mr. Thornton.
Here.
New Kent County, Vice Chair Page.
Present.
City of Richmond, Dr. Newbill.
Here.
Thank you. We do have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Firestone. And again, good morning. And with that, next item on the agenda is consideration of amendments to the agenda. Do we have any amendments to the agenda?
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Carroll.
I see that on the initial agenda that was put together and advertised that there was not an opportunity or consideration to discuss a letter that was sent to us from Goochland County in reference to one of the projects that's been approved in the transportation package that we approved back in May. And I think the letter itself and the request merits discussion by the Finance Committee, and probably even further through for full committee. So I would ask to make an amendment to the itinerary today to include, and I will see what staff feels it's appropriate to add for discussion under either they want it under new business, perhaps it could be under the CVTA TAC reports, under maybe 7D.
That sounds very appropriate. Do I have a second for that motion?
A second.
Motion is second. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Mr. Gregory, I see you there. If I need a roll call vote on any of this stuff, let me know, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. All right, with that, we're gonna put that as item 7D for the Goochland's request. And in keeping with the TAC, we will move item C to B and B to C. That way it'll be tied together. Okay. Next thing we have on the agenda is a motion for approval of minutes. Everybody had a chance to look at the minutes from our previous meeting. Any modifications? Or, appreciate a motion for approval.
No, you brought.
Mr. Chair, I move that the minutes be approved as presented.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Ms. Newbill, Dr. Newbill. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, minutes are approved. Time to open public comment period. Do we have anybody online as far as?
We do not have anyone who's indicated they wish to
Do we
speak.
have anybody in the room who wishes to speak? Seeing none, we'll close public comment period. Move on. Let's move in here. Item 6 is Chairman's report. This being my first time in the seat, there's not a whole lot for me to report on at this point in time, other than I feel like Mayor Stoney ought to be sitting here instead of me. But I think we're starting off with a new year. We've got a lot of good things going, and I'm looking forward to working with each and every one of you as we go forward to serve the full board of the CVTA. And I did all that in less than a minute to attend this on this agenda, so we might get out a little bit earlier. With that, let's turn this over to Ms. Clark and Mr. Parsons for the CVTA activities report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're going to tag team these 4 items. The first item, 7A, the financial activities and investment reports, starting on page 7 in your packet. We actually have 2 reports, or 2 investment reports, one for June of 22 and one for July of 22. If you recall, Chesterfield County shared that we do now have funds going into a variety of different investment portfolios, and you can see in the July report that some of the the yields for those investments and how that proceeds. We also have on page, this is an updated item, but it should be reflected in the packet. On page 10 is the financial statement for the entire fiscal year ended June 30th, 2022. So it summarizes the distributions, not just the local ones, but also the regional and the GRTC distributions for the year in the far right column. And this should not be a surprise, as the financial departments for each jurisdiction have been receiving monthly reports relating to this, but just puts it all in one place for easy reference. If you haven't taken any questions, none of this stood out as anything to be surprised about. Staff is pleased with the way things are progressing.
Thank you very much, Chet. And any questions of Chet regarding the financial reports? I guess we need a motion to accept those, do we not?
Yeah.
No, that's just an information thing. Okay, with that, then we'll go on to the annual report.
Thank you very much. This is also an information item. Staff is aware and trying to heed the advice of the authority in terms of talking about what CVTA has accomplished over the past 2 years, what its plans are for the next year, and one way that we think we can really do a good job of summarizing, not just for members, but also for the stakeholders and the general public, is to do a really well-conceived annual report, something that is not bulky, not multiple pages of text, and we're soliciting the assistance of one of our on-call consultants through our Plan RVA contract to help put together an annual report. There is a small cost associated with that, and it fits into the approved administrative operating budget, and should be under the purview of staff to move forward with that. So we have made the call to move forward with that, and we hope to have that annual report completed for distribution at the next authority meeting at the end of October. I believe the cost was around $1,500.
Comments, questions, Mr. Parsons, on the annual report? Mr. Newbill, you have any questions on this?
No, I do not.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think it is a good idea. It's going to fit in very well with our need for public involvement on that. So thank you for the work on that. With that, I believe, Dyrona Clark, are you with us?
Yes, he's here.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, and we're going to let you tell us about what's going on with TAC.
Awesome, thank you. Again, TAC held its meeting on September 12th. As Chet did talk about the annual certifications, reminder that the member governments have until the end of September to get their annual certs in. I did want to provide a quick update on the Smart Scale Round 5. I'm sorry, 1 second. All right, sorry about that. For Smart Scale Round 5, the validation of applications are still underway and completion is anticipated in December. For clarity from my last meeting update, in the spring, when Smart Scale 5 projects have been announced, those projects leveraging CVTA funds can either select to keep CVTA dollars on the project or to let the funds go back into the pot. So essentially, currently the guidance gives a sponsor 2 rounds of Smart Scale to leverage their allocated regional CVTA funds on the same project. I did want to provide that clarity based on last month's update. TAC discussed the Fall Line Trail. Chesterfield, Henrico, and Richmond submitted a draft spending plan that was combined with VDOT's design build spending plan. TAC discussed the request, but the spending plan cost exceeded available funds from both the CVTA and CTB combined. So this item will be the main item on the Fall Line Working Group agenda, as well as October TAC meeting. Hopefully TAC will have a recommendation for the October Finance Committee meeting. The next item TAC discussed was the readiness of CVTA regional projects in relation to producing a cash flow document for the Finance Committee. For this item, TAC members were asked to provide by September 26th a cash flow update on their regional projects moving forward. TAC anticipates having a draft cash flow document in October, but due to VDOT administering regional projects for some jurisdictions, as well as for segments of the Fall Line Trail, we anticipate a full cash flow document for the Finance Committee and full body by November meetings. Finally, there was a conversation or discussion about the Goochland request, which is described as when a locality requests to reprogram current round one regional funds from one approved project to another approved project. As the current guidance does not address this specific request, it only addresses deobligation of funds by a sponsor that would then go back to the pot. Specifically, the request from Goochland was to reprogram approximately 16.8 million of regional funds from Route 288 new southbound auxiliary lane south of US 250 to its other project, I-64 at Ashland Road, Route 623 interchange, DDI. They also requested that the Route 288 remain eligible for funds through the future applications for CVTA regional funding. That is what the TAC discussed. There was not consensus on recommendation to the Finance Committee. But Chet, if you want to add any additional information on that item.
Mr. Parsons?
Mr. Chair, that's the next agenda item. We can address it there.
Okay, we'll address it there at that point. Okay, anything further on that, Ms. Clark?
No, sir.
Any questions with Ms. Clark on anything that she's reported? Mr. Thorne? Looked like you had a question.
Well, I just want to make sure that I think I understood what she said.
Okay.
I have a question, Mr. Chair. So
Please.
from the TAC, is the Finance Committee getting recommendations whether they are approved or disapproved? Or are we just getting recommendations from the TAC of approved projects? So are you making a recommendation to us and then Finance decides, or is TAC deciding and only giving us the recommendations that they approve?
Madam Page, essentially the TAC, the Finance Committee and the full body has every right to hear any item. It technically goes through the TAC first. And so it would be, it can be that we can make a recommendation for approval, but it also can appear on your agenda if it was not approved. Because we don't make any decisions of whether something moves forward or not. We hear it and we evaluate it for its technical capacity and analysis, and then make a recommendation if it passes, by the vote of the TAC.
If I may follow up on that, Ms. Clark, in this particular case, in your meeting, you indicated there was not a consensus. I understand that, but was there a vote to approve a recommendation And if so, what was that vote?
Yes, there was a vote. There was a motion on the floor for the approval, for a recommendation for approval, and it did not pass. One small caveat to it was the meeting did run 2 hours, and some of our members did have previous commitments because the meeting is usually scheduled an hour. So some of those members did fall, in the call early. So their vote wasn't considered. But for those members within the quorum, it did fail.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. Any further questions?
Mr. Chair. To get back to Ms. Page's question, when we first established the authority, I remember a flow chart that we put together on when TAC would consider something, when finance would consider something, and it was a case-by-case basis depending on what the topic was. So something that is a financial concern to the authority should run through the finance committee. But there will be times when TAC will make a recommendation that goes directly to the authority that won't run through finance, and vice versa. Sometimes finance will make recommendations that don't go through TAC. So it really, at this point, there isn't a formal structure where every committee weighs in on a particular request.
Thank you for that, Mr. Parsons.
Mr. Chair, I'd like a little bit more clarity though. Now, what is TAC's responsibility in relationship to recommendation to the Finance Committee and the large committee?
Well,
Take that, Mr. Parsons?
Sure, yes. I think TAC's responsibility is to consider the work that is pertaining to the authority that they have expertise in. So whether that is prioritization, which is something that they've been focused on a lot, whether it's project selection, whether it's application for funding, TAC has taken the lead on those types of things. Sometimes there will be issues such as what was discussed Monday, where it was directly related to prioritization, so TAC took that up as part of their meeting discussion. But it also is directly related to finance because of the magnitude of the financial request, the change that would happen, and the impact to the prioritization that was already approved by the authority in May. So this is one of those instances where every committee really has an interest to provide a recommendation to the full authority.
Thank you, Mr. Parsons. I believe that for clarity reasons, and Mr. Brigger, you can help me with this if you need to, is that the CVTA TAC actually answers directly to the full CVTA board, not to the finance committee. The reason I believe from Mr. Carroll's amendment today was we all know that this is to expedite the process, because if it goes to the full board is going to send it back to the finance committee for review. So this is an opportunity for us, but we do not make this decision either, the full board does. And so this is basically, I've got that right, Mr. Prager?
I believe so, Mr. Chair. The full body can direct any of the committees to conduct its business or to handle any given issue. I believe Chet's and Dorona are right as well that certain matters can flow through the TAC, certain matters can flow through the finance committee directly to the full body, and those committees can make recommendations to the full body as well. It's just a matter of how you want the work to flow.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any further questions of Ms. Clark before we move on to if no further questions, let's move on to item 7D now, which is the Goochland, to discuss the Goochland request. I believe the Chairman of the Goochland Board, Mr. Neil Spoonhour, is with us today, and he has asked for the opportunity to speak to the committee. So I would we'll be happy to allow him to do so.
Did y'all sit like this on purpose? Because you know I was gonna sit like this.
That's the hot seat, that's the hot seat.
This is not at all intimidating.
They tried to get me to sit in that chair, I didn't do it.
I just brought a copy of my speaking notes because I tend to wander and will probably not say something important, so please bear with me. Thank you for your time this morning. So just to give you a little background on why we're here. I appreciate the work of what the TAC did, and I believe that Ms. Clark represented what I saw yesterday at the TAC meeting very, very well. And I do think that they did exactly as the TAC has been charged. They're sort of all of us that serve in local government understand what it's like to be in a Dillon rule state where you're only granted the authority to do the things you can. It was very clear, and I think through a lot of due diligence from the TAC, they realized that this situation has not come up, and that there has not been a situation or a policy that addresses this. So I do understand their hesitation with supporting this. What we are asking, and not to repeat what Ms. Clark said, but we have a very real need to improve our Ashland Road interchange, and we are asking that we do move some funds from another project that we were awarded this year through the regional funds or the 288 auxiliary. And let me talk a little bit about why and how we got here. The Ashland Road interchange, which is Ashland Road and 64, is the main corridor into our industrial corridor of the county. It's been outlined in our plan that way for years. We have been trying since Smart Scale has been established to get improvements to that failing and dangerous intersection. That road backs up onto 64 at peak times, so it is extremely dangerous. Yet, because we've had no economic development, because there's no movement of goods, and because thankfully we haven't had any accidents, it has failed miserably through the Smart Scale process. The last time that we submitted, which was 2020, it came in 67 out of 71 applications. So it was not doing well in Smart Scale. We were extremely grateful that the regional funds were awarded and that the CVTA saw fit to realize the importance of this project as a regional project and award us the fifth, I think it was over like $14.4 million on top of the $2 million that has already been assigned from Goochland County to make the solution that VDOT recommended, which was a single lane, a north and south lane divergent diamond at that interchange. And that solution, we were told, was going to work. We built our entire transportation plan around that solution. We have been working for years as our county continues to grow, as do all of ours, but that being the main artery into our industrial area and into our county is our number one priority for several reasons. Unfortunately, 2 weeks before on July 21st, 2 weeks before the board was going to take up a significant vote on the largest project, economic development project in Goochland County, VDOT asked us to meet at the Goochland County Administration Office. And Mr. Mann explained to us that the analysis that we've been using for the last 4 years had been flawed, that it did not account for current queuing, and therefore the single lane divergent diamond would not work, not only with this project, but when it came out that without any further economic development, it would be at I believe a D or F. So putting $17 million towards a project that would come out at that level was not something that they would recommend. So we're coming to you today to ask you to help us address this situation. We're not asking for additional funds to be coming from the CVT. We're asking for funds that are already allocated. Once we found this out, myself and staff worked very hard. We called every person we knew. We looked under our seat cushions. We tried to find money wherever we could. We talked to economic development. We talked to the Secretary of Transportation. We talked to the Secretary of Commerce. There just was no money to be had. This is a very favorable project, which I'll talk about in a second. But in a conversation with Mr. Brown at CTV, He explained that a possible strategy would be to reallocate these funds, or for Goochland to be able to come up with $35 million. Goochland we get $200,000 a month from the CVTA local funds. So it would be my daughter's children's lifetime before we could raise the money to do this project. So a strategy would be to see if Goochland find a way to come up with 50% of the money. So there are no promises. Nobody has said, hey, if you do this, you'll get that. That is not the case. All we're asking is to be able to allow us to move these funds so that we can leverage this project, so that we can have a chance, so we can compete not against our region, but against Northern Virginia, against Hampton Roads. We're asking to support what we believe is a much more critical project. And our goal was to keep all of our projects. That's the road we went down. We actually viewed the 288 expansion as the nuclear option, the option that we didn't want to choose. But because we hadn't gotten any smart scale projects or any projects of any site up until this round of CVTA funds. So we obviously did not want to forego any funding. But we know for our county and for the region, this is the most important project. This project, the Board of Supervisors, just 1 week after this bomb was dropped on us by VDOT, we did approve what's called Project Rocky. We are under an NDA, but I can tell you it is the largest worldwide online distribution center. So I think we can kind of guess who it is, but I'm not allowed to say. That is going to, we rezoned a 100-acre parcel to allow this distribution center. And that's going to bring 1,000 full-time jobs to the region. Now, if you look at Goochland's population of 25,000 and our unemployment rate of 2.7, we couldn't even fill the seasonal jobs. So these jobs are going to be going out to folks in Henrico, Chesterfield, Powhatan, Hanover. This is also going to be bringing a $500 to $600 million capital investment. Mr. Carroll, you mentioned on your way in that you have to leave because the governor's coming for another announcement. Goochland County is not in BizSense every week with a new economic development project. This is the largest thing that has ever come our way, and this is something that is necessary and really gets us on the map for that corridor. I've been in the situation where I've had the catch-22. I can't get that interchange fixed because I have no economic development. I can't get any economic development because I can't get that interchange fixed. We can fix that here by simply doing what I believe is the right thing, by just actually reallocating these funds to support our smart scale application. That application may not pass, I understand that, but it does give us the best chance to keep that money in the county. I've heard arguments that this is just benefiting Goochland. I've already talked about the jobs. This project is 1.4 miles from the Henrico border. It's 2 miles from the Hanover border. 37% of the traffic, based on a study that was done, I could name that study in another part of my notes, 37% of that traffic, Mr. Peterson, comes from your county. Hanover, that's the Hanover County's main way to get to 64 when they're traveling. So this is a huge regional project, not to mention the revenues that it brings and then the capital investment. We also believe that this is the correct decision for the CVTA. I've spent about 5 hours last night going through every document that is online. This situation is not addressed. This is not us saying, oh, we're going to apply for these projects and then move this money over. When the Secretary of Commerce asked me, well, why didn't you come to us for help earlier? I didn't come for help because I didn't need help. You all had helped me already. The solution that I was told, which was a single divergent diamond, was fully funded. We were able to support this and do this because of the generosity and the wisdom of the CVTA. And I'm just asking us to use that same generosity and wisdom to support this project, which is the best regional project that we have presented. We would love to be able to do all 4 of our projects, but we just don't have that ability at this time. in looking at the code, this board does have the final authority in approving the fund distributions. I understand that we voted on the list. It was not an easy vote. You all remember what we went through to do that. And believe me, Goochland County does not want to be the fly in the ointment. We don't want to be coming here, and I wouldn't be coming here if this wasn't critical. I believe this does not allow us to jump the line. This is not okay, we're just going to provide this to Goochland, hand this to them, because it's not approved. This just leverages our smart scale funds. It allows us to move forward. And as Ms. Clark said, I think there was concern yesterday in the TAC meeting that we were asking for both projects to be funded. That's not the case. All we were asking, the second piece of that request was that at a future date that we could apply again. But if this, as I was told recently in the last couple of days, this project, the 288 auxiliary line, is extremely important to Henrico. They can carry that project if Goochland is not allowed to. I would hope that in future rounds we'd be allowed to, because it is important. We have Capital One, we have CarMax, we have PFG, we have the Federal Reserve. All those folks, so thousands of people coming into that area. That is an important project, and we don't. And again, not doing that was the nuclear option. And then I'll close with this. I talked to Mr. Casey and about the announcement. This region is doing well. We're seeing projects in all of our jurisdictions: Hanover, Chesterfield, Henrico, New Kent. You guys, the new, is it the advanced auto part? And I do believe it's because of the camaraderie and the familial tone that Chair Thornton set for the first 2 years of the CVTA and how we work together as a region. Eyes are going to be honest on this. We are told that out of 9 projects that this future buyer of this largest online retailer had 8 or 9 projects. This is in Virginia. This is the last one standing. They've canceled the rest of them. Now, I can't verify that because they won't share, but the project managers tell me that that's the case. The eyes are honest on this, and for future economic development of our region, they're going to look at how we handle this. So I just ask you to do what we believe is right by the region and support this. But I thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Chairman Spruill. I appreciate your input there. Are there any questions for Spoonhour before we start into open discussion of this?
I may have a question later, but not right this second.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. You're gonna stick around here if we do have some questions, I assume.
I will be happy.
Okay. Before we go and have a discussion of this, Chair, would you please give us a little bit more detailed report from TAC specifically to this particular request?
Sure. I think that it would be prudent at this point to review the process that led up to the April 29th vote on the regionally significant projects where this project was posted. So, as you know, the state code has certain requirements that the authority has to adhere to, and I'll read one. The authority shall develop a prioritization process based on an objective and quantifiable analysis that considers the benefits of projects relative to their costs. Only projects evaluated using such process may be funded. So that's the foundation that TAC has to consider when coming up with the priority list and the recommendations back to the full authority.
Is that not the regulations that we all have to adhere to? This is part of the
Yes,
legislation?
I meant to say TAC is responsible for developing the priority process. This past year, fall of 21, TAC established the process, which we went through all our committees, where there was a timeline. There was an application window. There were applications that were sent out to every jurisdiction to apply for regional funding. That process yielded a handful of really good applications. Not all of them were able to be funded due to the amount of revenue that was expected. We had a third-party engineering consultant come in and verify the cost estimates that were provided for each of those projects. For the most part, they all checked out. So those verified cost estimates were used along with the calculated cost benefit ratio, which the code requires, to come up with a prioritized list of 30 projects that TAC recommended for the authority to approve for this round of regional funding for FY 23 to 26. In April, the authority took that action and approved the list of 30 projects. It eventually made an out-year commitment to I-64 in New Kent that was on the timeline past when the regional project window was. And that's kind of gotten us to where we are today. If we go back and specifically look at the two Goochland projects that Mr. Spoonhour referenced, the southbound 288 project, which was around $16.8 million, and the Ashland Road DDI project, both of those projects ranked in the prioritization process. We did some calculations and looking at the initial request for the funding, when Goochland was requesting just over $15 million for Ashland Road. That project ended up ranking 9th in our list of 30 projects. After the revision to the request, that project moves down. It basically drops to about 19th because of the increase in cost. When you're looking at cost benefit, the benefit is still the same. I mean, it provides great benefit to the region, but the cost benefit ratio drops. It's still on the list. I think the main point is it's still on the list. The southbound 288 project is roughly the same in terms of where it ranks. So I think when you look at the numbers and the requirements that the CVTA is supposed to follow to look at prioritization and approval of regional funding, it still checks out. There would need to be some work if the CVTA decides to move forward and honor this request, there would still need to be some work to determine when that funding would be available and the scale. So I think that it would probably need to be looked at in an out year if that is possible. But I think that there would, with some further work, it could work out.
Okay, like I said, let's do this in workshop format. I think this is open discussion. You don't have to ask me for permission to talk, but I think we need to have a discussion about how this goes forward.
Question, what happens when you take the money from one project and put it in the other? How does the other project score?
That's what I did.
Nope, you didn't, because what I did yesterday, not to be mean here, but when you add the other money to it, that project moves up to the project that they're asking for the money for moves to 14, not 19. It moves to 14 based on the formula, which is pretty close to where it was before. So, you know, it's when you take the money from the other project and you add it in, that's where it falls. It falls at 14. It doesn't fall lower than that. But the other project, where does that fall to without any funding? That's the other question, right? So the southbound without any funding, and that was actually that was not submitted, or was it submitted for smart scale? I think it was, wasn't it? Or was it not?
No,
No, it was fully funded.
Yeah, it was fully funded. So that project pretty much gets put on hold until money can be determined for it later. But this project, if you take the money from one to the other, it ends up falling number 14.
Mr. Carroll, you're correct. In the calculation that I did, we put in the full cost of the project, not the request. So 35 million would be up around 14.
It'll be about 14.
Yes, sir.
And I think that's an important factor to look at, because I knew that what you did was just move it down based on what it was funded for with the additional actual cost now. And it certainly falls a lot lower because of that. So the question is then, if you add this to it and it moves up, then we don't know how it's going to score at Smart Scale. Smart Scale could look at it and go, yeah, you've got a lot of funding for it, but these other factors don't help. So we don't know how that will work.
Am I allowed to participate in this?
In a moment.
Okay.
Ms. Page.
I've listened to all of this. And as another former board member told me, they love to watch the video. It's like, look at the video. So I looked at the video, and I took up issue with some things that was expressed. However, my biggest issue that I take up is I have listened for 2 years how everybody comes together to work together for every locality. I didn't really hear it yesterday. I mean, at the TAC meeting, I didn't hear that. And maybe that's not a priority there. However, when you talk about 382 jobs from AutoZone, please don't get me in trouble with them. When you talk about the amount of time and the amount of resources that are spent into any locality, but especially a population of 25,000 people, being able to land this kind of project, and we are transferring money, knowing that it was a VDOT error that caused it, knowing that VDOT, and no offense if they're online, but knowing the time frame that they work within, surely it's not going to be a project that's going to be completed in a year or 2 years. I mean, that's just a reality of the project. But I think that when we talk about setting precedents, when we think about the influence that we want to use in the CVTA, it becomes CVTA looking past the technical qualifications, and I know that they're important, but looking at how it affects each locality. This is not a Goochland County project. If this project comes to fruition, and it's still a hope and a prayer, because you still got to go through smart scale, and I'm telling you, keep hope alive. But when you look at going through that, then you look at now you're relying, and we can go to I-64, since I know that's been mentioned the way it was done, but you look at what do you need to keep it alive? And our responsibility as representatives for our locality is to fight for our locality. Sometimes we win, sometimes we lose, okay, but we have to take in consideration everybody's needs. That's not our needs, or just because I didn't win, I'm gonna take my ball and run home with it and nobody else can play. That's not what this was formed for. It's formed so that we can have leverage against projects that would not even ever be considered. That's what it's for. And so I appreciate, of course I appreciate the fight, but I appreciate the purpose of this committee is formed was to help leverage for small scale. We're not asking for additional funding. We're asking for money to be transferred. It moves up to 14 from 19, which is significant, but we're still based on the decisions that's made past this board. It's based on those decisions. We're looking at employment opportunities, not only for Goochland, but for surrounding localities as far as Northern Virginia or as far as Williamsburg, Virginia. That's what we're looking at. We're looking at something that was laid in their laps due to a VDOT error, not through any fault of their own, not through you didn't submit on time, not through any of that. And that's what we're looking at. And I think as a committee, there are certain things that we have to go beyond. And I'm 21 years retired military, so I believe in rules and regulations. But sometimes we have to have the plain old country common sense to fall into it and see, because when a locality that's a member of the CVTA prospers, everybody prospers. There's more tax dollars, so that means there's more tax dollars for CVTA. We cannot just look at a specific want or a need for a specific locality. And how many times, you don't know how I sit there and drool when Chesterfield and Henrico and Richmond get projects. It's like, why in the world can't we just get something? all we got is a warehouse. But how huge is that? Just for our locality. And I think that we have to look at those and consider those facts when making a consideration as well. Now, on the CVTA side, absolutely TAC and finance and the full board has a responsibility of what's the legality of it, what can we do, and not necessarily what is the precedence or who can be involved or who can't be involved in it. That's what it has to be. And we can't let personal bias or, I want to be the big guy or whatever falls into play. If we can't sit on these boards without bias, then we don't need to be on any of these boards. Period. That's how I feel. If you cannot sit there, if your personal job is based on your decision and another board, and you know it's not the right thing, or it could be the right thing to do it, then maybe you should consider the committees and the boards that you sit on. But the CVTA is not run by anything but elected officials, if I'm correct. And so that's my 2 cents.
Mr. Chair, just to add,
Carol?
one of the things that concerns me about the overall project list, and I'm looking at the whole picture here. We saw yesterday, as an example, that inflation was now at 8.3%. Stock market took a major hit yesterday because of that news. And depending on who you talk to build a VDOT maintained road right now, it's anywhere from $700 to $800 a linear foot. And why do I bring all that up? Because quite frankly, the list that we approved, that we said was roughly $276 million plus $100 million for 64 widening back in April and May, those numbers are probably no good anymore. The numbers for many of those projects are probably a lot higher. And even one of these projects that we're talking about here, VDOT has already revised, not one, but both, on what the cost would be. One, because it was an error on their calculations on what the traffic numbers were, and that drove the number up tremendously on the 64 project. But the other one, now even looking at what the CVTA has put forward to fund it, it's not going to be enough money. Now, I will bet a cup of coffee with anybody that all of our projects are looking at that same problem. Every single project that we approved the other day, the numbers of what it costs today and tomorrow to do are going to be a lot higher. And that's an issue that we may end up having to look at in the future as to how we originally voted to structure our pay-go process or debt issue process. And so what are we going to do later when Smart Scale does come back and they say we're going to fund these projects, and then we start putting them out for bid? We know this happens because we've seen it in the TPO as an example, when a project gets put out for bid and then the numbers come back in higher and we have to find money somewhere else to allocate to do the project. So what are we going to do when all of our projects come in higher later? The answer is we're going to have to figure a way to restructure, even if that means issuing bonds to be able to cover the projects. And so when I look at this, if this was a project that had not been submitted for funding, but they came to us later and said, hey, look, we got this deal, we need help, I'd be a no. I'd say, sorry, you should have put it in. We have a project in Chesterfield County, as a matter of fact, that we didn't put in. Love to put it in. It's a similar project, cost about the same amount. We didn't put it in. I'm not going to come to you tomorrow and say, oh my God, we just got this huge economic deal that said they could put it right down the street. Can I get money from you? Sorry, didn't put it in. Those are the rules. Project was put in and it was funded. We all voted to fund those projects. It's not like we're going to take the other project out of the list. The project could sit there. After Smart Scale goes through, every jurisdiction that put a project in, we'll see how it was scored and determine whether or not they want to keep the project in for another year to be evaluated, or pull the project and say you can put those funds back in, because we may turn around and say, I'm going to submit another one. We all know we're going to look at this in probably July or August of next year and look at it again. But what I would say is if the full body chooses to allow this to happen, then we need to make sure that there's some other insurances that are part of this. That is that, number one, the southbound lane project does not go away. It stays in there and it moves to the number one priority to be funded if the funds come back. Or we also go back and look at our financing structure, bring in our financial expert to come in and take a look at the whole priority list and say, can we do this, keep the other project as well if we restructure the way we did our debt? And if we collectively say, all right, if we can do this financially and we can add the money to it without having to lose the other project, we'll do that. But I think that at that point, when that happens, we also got to maybe have all of our jurisdictions go back and look at their projects and say, all right, I know we voted for this back then, let's get updated numbers to see what it looks like, because we may have to restructure all of our debt on how we're financing all these projects in the future. And that's I hate to say it, but based on what's happening in the economy and based on talking with developers on what it's costing for a road, we're pretty much already underfunded on all of our projects.
Chet, when, timeframe, I know I asked you to get a timeframe over the next year of all key points. When is TAC scheduled to do its annual review of our projects?
That's one of the discussion items of, the TAC called it parking lot items, to think about the guidelines that have been adopted and revising those and making adjustments.
So we talked.
The next step is to see what happens with Smart Scale. And it looks like the recommendation is going to be consider those adjustments in July of '23. After the Smart Scale decisions are back, we know what money is, what's funded, what's not, and then think about revising the listing and the prioritization.
Well,
So,
not just the listing, not just the listing and the prioritization, but also what the numbers look like. In other words, even moving towards Smart Scale now, we don't know if I'm assuming they're going to accept what we put in and say, okay, this is what it is. But common sense tells us that the numbers that we put in are not going to hold. They're not going to hold in 6 months. They're going to be higher.
What's the total number of projects that are on the list? These are 9 and 14 or 8, 9 and 15?
It was 30.
30 projects were 30.
Dr. Newbill, do you have anything you would like to share in this conversation? Dr. Newbill, you still with us?
Yes, I'm sorry. The question was?
Just looking for your input in this conversation.
Oh, okay. So I think to the point that was made clearly, costs are going to increase across all of these projects. I think you're absolutely correct. I'd like to slightly unbundle that discussion, because that clear, as you were saying, has implications for all of our projects, and we'll see that coming. And I'd really like to unbundle that discussion from this request. And Mr. Chair, really wanting to understand what your desire is in terms of this committee, because as I hear it, it is, again, requesting to reprogram these funds to support what sounds like a significant economic development project that has impact and implications not just for Goochland, but for surrounding counties in terms of employment opportunities. It does not automatically guarantee the Route 288 new southbound auxiliary lane, but asks that it would remain eligible for funding. So yes, we know the numbers will increase, but I guess I'm a little more focused in terms of what is our path forward in terms of addressing this requested action of reprogramming these funds, which seems to be an opportunity for Goochland and surrounding counties, both in terms of being catalytic for economic development, but also leveraging additional funds to complete the project. So I guess I'm a little unclear in terms of our path forward relative to action on the request
I think you're
from
correct. I
this
think we're all
committee?
unclear. That's why we're having this conversation. So, is to try and determine what is the best path forward.
And I guess we have had instances in the past where we have accommodated such, is that correct?
I'm not sure that we've had a situation like this before.
Well,
Well,
what I
not
would say,
verbatim, but I'm looking at the document that was provided to us. And it seems that on the CVTA impacts on the second page, I don't know, do you have that?
The letter.
Are you talking about in the letter that was sent by Digson or the?
Yeah, by Goochland County and the CVTA impacts on the second page.
Yes, okay.
So, I mean, it seems like we have accommodated in the past, and certainly in this instance, it appears that the accommodation would allow for, like I said, support and for hopefully attracting major economic development, leveraging additional resources, et cetera. So I'm, I know I'm not normally here, the mayor typically would be present, so I'm getting up to speed, but it appears that we have certainly made accommodations in the past. It seems that this request would have benefit for multi-region, would allow Goochland to, position to leverage additional dollars, et cetera, et cetera. So again, so I'm at a slight disadvantage. I do apologize for that, as I'm, representing the mayor who, et cetera. But I'd be willing to, if a motion is where we're going, to look to make a motion, Mr. Chair. If we're not there, then that's fine too.
I don't think we're there at this point. I do, the two items that are under the CVTA impact, Mr. Parsons, correct me if I'm wrong, both of those took place before we had set up our system of prioritization and ranking of the projects. Is that correct?
Yes, it was.
Okay, so we did not have a system at the time that those took place. We do have a system now.
So we did not have a prioritization process and scoring process for either of those, because Fall Line Trail was fairly recent.
That was the first item that CVTA committed.
Yeah, we have the Route 288 and the Fall Line Trail, and I-64, excuse me.
Mr. Chair, the 288 northbound hard shoulder running was evaluated.
It was.
But that was also the project that was identified by the governor for, or the secretary for innovation funding. So there was the additional pot that came in from the state to support that project.
Mr. Thorne.
Mr. Chairman, I was listening as coachily as I can, and if you recall, being the chair, I did encourage a certain word when it came to the funding process, that is flexibility. And I see probably that I should add an adjective to that, and that is responsible flexibility. And so one of the things that we encouraged at that time, as each of you will recall, is the whole idea of looking out for each group, for each locality, a certain compatibility that we tried to establish there. And so when you look at all of this information, and I did hear that there was some information that was faulty. So what we need to do, I think, is kind of look to see, does this have to be done right away, or do we have time? is almost analogous to if my colleague doesn't mind my saying this, we learn from 64. And what we can do is to make sure that we look for each possibility coming from what I call sister locality. And as you mentioned several times, this doesn't just benefit just the locality that introduced it, but several additional localities, sister localities. So I'm thinking that, we probably need to get the input of the whole committee and take a look at it and see, why can't we do it? Or if we can't do it, how can we make preparation to do it better? So I think we have an opportunity here. Just take a look at it, and but there's one caution: we need to make sure we get the process straight. I do get concerned about process. So that's my input.
Thank you, Mr. Thornton. I think you raised a good question. Mr. Spoonhour, what's the time frame of when this needs to be done? We've talked about the money, but we have not talked about when.
So because I don't have direct access to the ultimate buyer, what I would tell you is that property is rezoned. It is going up for sale. The sale is supposed to transpire in March, pending plan of development and pending this. I have not been told this in the exact words, but I think we're all smart enough to realize if your business is the movement of goods and you have a failing intersection and no path forward, the appetite to move there is decreased significantly. So,
Construction takes time.
of course.
So
So
we're not
they're looking
necessarily
to.
need the money this year. Is it next year? Is it 2 years?
So we're
3
looking
years?
for, great, yes, okay, sorry. So if there is a plan forward to have an intersection that will be viable for their business model, then they are hoping to close on the property in March, and they're looking to open the facility in 2025.
So 25,
Mr. Chair?
24. Yes, Dr. Newbell.
Just a point of clarification. These funds are, the request is reprogrammed to help leverage Smart Scale, and Smart Scale has a due date of October. Is that not correct?
So, yes, because we found out on the 21st, Goshen County staff, we want to give them some props, within 5 days submitted the Smart Scale application for this project. So this project is in this round of Smart Scale. And we have earmarked these funds to support that application, which will have to change if the committee does not allow us to leverage the funds from that.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Thank you for the question.
Mr. Parsons, let me ask you a question on this now. Smart Scale, all these projects have already been submitted. Correct. And so are we allowed to go back and revise the submission?
Not after the submittal date.
But we have already made the submittal, is what you're saying. And so we cannot go back and change anything on the.
Mr. Chair, we didn't submit the I-64 project through the CVTA for Smart Scale.
No, I know.
Goochland did that, and we didn't submit the 288 southbound project for Smart Scale, did we?
That was paid for.
It's paid for, so we don't have to worry about from the CVTA side from amending that. Are you talking about all of the other projects?
Well, I am looking, like Mr. Thornton said, with process, I have to think in terms, I fully appreciate where Goochland has been caught in the middle on this thing. At the same time, though, I'm thinking we're dealing with a regional pot. And we're talking about shifting funds from number 14 to number 8 on the list of 30. If we're really talking about this, why are we not talking about shifting 30 and 29 and 28 up? The projects that are highly unlikely to have even be looked at if you're looking at a regional project. So you know, tossing this out because we're trying to look at this as only the two projects only in Goochland. Whereas we're really talking about the number of regional projects. Where are the priorities? How difficult would it be for TAC to sit here and take a look at making this viable and see how everybody else does that? Do a re-ranking of the full 30 projects and put them in comparison, because I do have to wonder, you know, why are we taking away from a viable project to put on another viable project instead of taking the unviable?
But it's our viable project. We're not taking a project away from Henrico or Hanover or Newton. We're taking.
I'm not saying that if Hanover's got project number 30, it isn't going to happen. Should those funds be put to a higher project to make it happen on a higher project as a regional partner? Is the reason I'm looking at. Do we look at all the projects, or should we only be looking at these two? Because when we're talking about regional priorities, we do need to look at the region.
Well, as Mr. Carroll said, in his situation where if we didn't have any other funds that were allocated to Goochland, I would not be coming asking for this. It's because these funds were allocated for a Goochland project that obviously has impacts to all of our neighbors. And again, not anything we wanted to do. And one thing I would like to say, Mr. Parsons, you spoke a lot, you spoke about the reallocating of the project or looking at the numbers with the cost. But to my understanding, we have not looked at the added economic benefits and the demographic benefits, because we were told that it would take much too long. So in the code, it says we consider the benefit of the project relative to their cost. We've increased the cost. We've not looked at the increase in the benefit. And I know in your statement, you said there would not be any benefit, but a $600 million economic process with movement of goods is one of the categories. So the movement of goods from the Port of Virginia and the Port of Richmond, that will score much higher. The economic development will score much higher. So it will score extremely high in all of those. There's a potential that this could leapfrog that 288 project if you had the time to add in the economic benefits in our estimation. So I don't think it's fair to say, well, it's slipped down to 14 because we increased the cost, but we're not able to look at the other side of the equation. And Mr. Peterson, I completely understand your question. I think that's what I appreciate about you, is that you look at the totality of everything. And I don't know if it complicates things to look at 30, but maybe it's the right thing to do. I'm saying we're just asking for two projects that were in Goochland. In our county, and I believe in our region, this project is a significantly more impactful project to the region. That's why we're asking for it.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Parsons.
Yeah, Mr. Spoonhour is correct. These were all back of the napkin calculations that were done yesterday afternoon in terms of where the projects would move on the priority list. As I outlined earlier, we'd set up at least a 6-month process to evaluate prioritization and what the projects would do, including revising our cost estimates and those kinds of things. So, I mean, with essentially a last minute request, this is the extent of the information we can provide at this time. So it is flawed, but it hopefully gives the committee a better leg to stand on than not having it. I think that your question about the lower ranking projects and reevaluating those, that could be done. I think that would need to be probably a lengthy discussion, but I think we're also kind of commingling the responsibilities of the TPO and the CVTA, and the smart scale process was through the TPO, and the CVTA funding was brought into that as leverage. And I think we could certainly look at that for moving forward and seeing whether that would be something that would make sense and could score well. I think part of what we had hoped with this smart scale process is to see what CVTA leveraging does for the effectiveness of the applications. And then we can always work with CVTA and the TPO to make better applications next time.
What's the mood of the committee here? Do we want to make any recommendations to the full board, or do we want to involve the full board in the conversation?
Mr. Chair, I would think that, because we don't have a process in place, I would think that, and because it's, I heard, Mr. Carroll, what he said to move up another project, the 288 project, I think it was you said, to move it up if, this money was, if we did decide to do the transfer, I call it a transfer of funds. I think with that being said, with it being a first, I think that we have the opportunity to help out major localities to get it done, but then to look at a process or procedure which will give guidance to CVTA and to TAC of how to handle the situation as it comes up. We're still a new organization. We hear it all the time. We're working with living documents, and so we have the opportunity to make changes or corrections or revisions as we go, or in the foresight of what could happen. I mean, we talk about I-64, when they talked about widening I-64, it was only, I think it was like 200 and some million dollars versus the 700 and some million now. I am more than appreciative and localities of a letter of commitment to $100 million, but we still don't know what Smart City is gonna do. We still don't know what the federal government, we put in federal applications. I think we put in applications to everybody that had any money at all. You know, we still don't know how that's gonna do. We're waiting, like someone waiting for Santa Claus to December to see what Smart City is gonna do. So it may be that, unfortunately, a lot of the projects that we have prioritized won't even be a part of, the funds won't even be needed. And yeah, they're gonna be tremendous escalating costs. I mean, with every project, every commodity around, but still, I think we have the opportunity as CVTA to determine our financial commitment to a project. Whether it is, well, we're committed to this amount of funding this year to a project, or we have this amount of funding, we have this balance left. We still have an opportunity to work that out, and with letters of commitment or with the funding that we set aside to, for projects that's pay and go, as we said. So every project doesn't have to be based on pay and go. And we can set our limitations on that.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Chair, okay.
let her go first.
Dr. Newville?
I just wanted to be clear, coming from Ms. Page's statement, so, or maybe, are we looking at whether or not we would like to provide a letter of support to VDOT relative to the movement of these funds in order to leverage smart scale? Is that the point?
Mr. Chair?
I think I must have.
No, in this situation, I'm supporting moving the funds.
Right.
But the only thing when we talk about letter of support, and we had mentioned the I-64, that is a letter of support that that would not reach full commitment until 2025. That doesn't change the amount of the letter of support. $100 million is $100 million, whether the cost of the project goes up or not. That's all I'm saying. And so I'm thinking about letters of support and that kind of support from CVTA as we set up a process of how we would deal with situations like this. But at the current situation, to transfer the money from that And as Mr. Carl said, to move the project that you're taking the money off, move it up in CVTA.
Something for the entire board to consider, Mr. Chair. But the other thing I would say is that, I mean, I think this needs to go to the full board for consideration, but I also think there's some other things that we need to work on as well from the CVTA side, which is similar to what we did with the 64 project, which is to have a conversation with the state, with the secretary, with CTB, and to find out if there are other additional funds out there because of the significant economic impact of a specific project that could hang in the balance from this. I think it's worth the effort of the CVTA to assist Goochland with talking with the state representatives to see if there could be other funds that are out there that are available that could be also used because of the significance of the project. I don't know, it's obviously they've missed the deadline for any federal dollars. I mean, and as Paige said, when you look at the commitment we made for an example for the 64 widening, that was a commitment that happened after we initially passed the transportation package. And then we went back and did a similar exercise where we spoke with the secretary and other members in our state government about what significant funding could be found. And it was found. The General Assembly found $470 million, 320 and another 150. We found out that that VDOT was putting in for $150 million grant to the federal government. And we're still not done with that particular exercise, because if for some reason some of that money falls through, that whole project falls apart. So, and that $100 million commitment goes away from us. And so I think it's worth the exercise to explore these other things as well, and then bring it to the full committee with more information to say, this is what we've done. And it is a short time frame because of the limitations on when smart scale, when net numbers actually need to be approved. And it's probably something that would have to happen at our upcoming meeting, one way or the other. And but I think it's something that the full committee needs to look at.
Does that require a motion of any sort, Mr.?
I don't think so. I think what we're saying is this really needs to go to the full committee without a recommendation from the.
Yes, I was talking about a recommendation to take to the full committee. That was, okay. But you're saying it's not necessary.
What we're hearing is that we are not going to make a recommendation when it goes to the full committee, is what I'm hearing.
I've already asked Chet to put it on the next agenda to be considered by the full committee.
Okay, so
I wasn't speaking to a recommendation, but I was following Mr. Carroll's proposal that it go to the full body for discussion and decisioning, as opposed to a recommendation coming from this committee.
Correct.
I mean,
That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna put it on it, but if I need a motion, I'll make a motion to send it to the full committee for consideration. I'll make that motion.
Well, I don't think we need to have the motion. If it's
Right,
already
that's what I was
taken.
asking.
I don't think we're just basically, we've had the discussion. We're not making a recommendation at this point in time. Too many loose ends.
Well, I think there's other things we need to help them with.
Yes, I think we need to commit to help Goochland all we can. Don't know that the answer is the answer that's requested here. Move it from that. There's all kinds of ways of doing this. For instance, the Smart Scale is only going to fund so many of these projects. All the funds that are designated for all the rest of them are then available. Should those be the funds that come to help, in this situation, rather than taking funds away from something that might get approved?
I'm gonna say this, to be able to do the things like had to be done for I-64, the I-64 gap. I don't think, listening to Supervisor Spoonhauer, that they would even have the time frame and the opportunity to do that. I listened to the comments during the meeting. It was not an overnight thing. It takes a lot of time and to do that. And I can tell you that the AutoZone project in New Kent has opened the door for at least 16 inquiries for other projects of the same size or larger, and for 4 large considerations where we're in negotiating and meetings now. And with 2 of those companies, their question is, when are they gonna start on I-64? And so we're just hanging in the balance. And so with that, when you talk about state, they've missed the federal funding. And so I don't know what other resource of incentives and funding that they would be able to get in time to meet the developers' deadline at this point.
Well, at this point, Mr. Parsons, would you put together a recap of our conversations today to share with the full committee at the 23rd meeting?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair, one last point, and that is that, if the 23rd, as an example, if the body chooses to allow for the funds to be shifted, then the other thing we can look at, again, which is what I talked about earlier, is some of the things you spoke to about, that is restructuring the way we've actually set aside how we voted to actually fund the projects over the next 4 years. We could restructure the way we do that, and which could actually restore the funding quicker to this actual other project, which is not a smart scale project. It's a matter of just restructuring debt and saying, okay, you know what, we want to add another $15 million to this to make sure we're covering this other project that we had to shift money over. That's a conversation that the whole board can consider when it comes forward.
Okay. Can you take care of that for us, Mr. Parsons?
Yes, sir.
Okay. With that, then I think it's time to move on to next item on our agenda.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mr. Springtown, for being here and sharing with us. Whole business item number 8, Mr. Parsons, administrative support position.
Yes, sir. This is a request that I made of the Finance Committee at its last meeting, and you had asked to come back with a salary range. So I have not changed anything else with the description, which is included in the packet on page 11, but did add a salary range after conferring with the other 2 authorities in the state and research on similar positions, clerk positions that would help an organization like the authority. So I'm asking today if the committee agrees to consider a motion to recommend approval of the position and authorize staff to prepare the appropriate advertising materials. That doesn't mean that it's advertised immediately. I know there were considerations about the hiring of the executive director and the timing of that process, but we just wanted to make everything ready to go when the decision is made to advertise.
Has everybody had a chance to look at the job description? And the range, which is shown as 49.7 to 75.3. Is there any question about the need for this position? Then I would entertain a motion to send this to recommend to the full CTB board that this position, advertisements be prepared for this position. The
I
timing
move,
of,
Mr. Chair.
Dr. Newbill?
Yes, I was
Oh,
making,
okay, that's the motion.
Yeah.
Second?
Second.
Second from Mr. Farr. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr.
I
Chairman.
should point out though that there will also probably be a discussion of timing, whether this should be before or after the selection of the executive director.
Mr. Chair, I agree that that is a consideration certainly for me as well. Oftentimes the executive director will want to certainly have a role in selecting the executive. So I concur with you.
I just wanted to say, Mr. Chair, this helps because when we were preparing to put in an ad for the executive director, then we had to come back to see what the range should be. So having this in advance helps with the advertisement of position. So thank you.
I think you're the one that made this happen, or Dr. Newbill one. Mr. Gregory.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a side note on that, if and when the appropriate time arrives, you may want to consider whether a budget amendment may be necessary to cover those costs, but I know this is looking into the future, so I think you have plenty of time for that.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, let's go back to the MOU.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Ms.
Ms.
Eder,
Eder?
you're- yes.
Thanks. I just wanted to make sure you've got this handout copy. It's shown here on the screen as well. So just to ground us in where we've been, this committee reviewed a draft copy of the MOU at your last meeting. The committee asked that staff circulate it to all members of the CVTA to receive comment on the MOU. We did receive one comment and one suggestion, which is addressed in the handout that was provided to you. And I'm scrolling for those that are watching virtually to this section. Mr. Gregory worked on this. Because of the timing, the comments were due back to staff by August 31st. Those comments were shared at the commission meeting and executive committee last week. And then now it's back to this committee. At this point in time, the executive committee of Plan RVA is awaiting final confirmation from the CVTA that the MOU is in good order. And the executive committee of the commission will take action at the end of this process. So it's now kind of solely, I'll say, in the CVTA's court. Mr. Gregory did take the feedback that we received on this one section on the term and provided some revised language here that was also informed by the discussion that happened at last week's executive committee and full commission meeting. So this is, as I know it, the latest version with any and all edits and recommendations incorporated into it. Mr. Gregory, if you have more to add, I will certainly defer to you, but that's, Mr. Chair, that's really the end of my report.
Thank you, Ms. Heder. Mr. Gregory?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mrs. Heder did a fine job summarizing the MOU. You all have seen this several times before, as have Plan RVA. With their guidance, we did make the language change that is depicted on your screen before you. Just a minor amendment to clarify some language in the term. And also, Plan RVA did request that the additional language be considered to allow for a review towards the end of the 5-year term of the MOU by both parties, to allow for them to consider if at that time, prior to the automatic renewal, if any changes or adjustments need to be made with enough time to do that prior to that that automatic renewal and prior to the required notice period for termination. So we've added that language in. That's what that additional underlined sentence provides for. And I will note that there's already language in the MOU on page 5 of 6 of the MOU. Provided at the top there, there you go, accountability and reporting. So that provides the mechanism for the back and forth between the two agencies to provide responsiveness to any issues that may arise. So I believe we've covered everything. Again, you've seen this on multiple occasions. If that amendment that was redlined on the draft is acceptable to you, I would suggest that you make a motion to forward it to the full body for consideration and recommended approval as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Gregory. Are there any concerns or issues with the memorandum of understanding as amended? In which case, I will entertain a motion to forward this to the full board with the recommendation for approval.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Mr. Chair.
Motion and a second. All in favor, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion is approved. Okay, let's move on down the line here. Next item we have is back to Mr. Parsons, the Vaughn Road overpass.
Yes.
Railroad crossing.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. This is under the general item of consultant grant support. And we have discussed this preliminarily, but with the bipartisan infrastructure law and the other federal grant programs that have become open and will be open over the next year or so, there's going to be a lot of opportunity between the TPO and CVTA to apply for federal funds to do a lot of new things and a lot of great things for the region. One of the things that we are trying to do as staff is to better position our region to be nimble and apply for those funding opportunities when they are available. We're seeing new opportunities open at least once a month, if not more frequently than that. The first item under 10A is a specific grant opportunity that we are pursuing right now for the Vaughn Road overpass. If you recall, this is a project in the town of Ashland that was approved for regional funding. It was one of the list of 30 projects. In addition, it was a smart scale application. We did receive notification that project was screened out from smart scale because it is focused, essentially it's focused on a rail improvement, and smart scale is really evaluating highway impacts. So it didn't make it through into the smart scale pool. For that reason, we think it's a great project and have been working with DRPT to develop this grant application through the Railroad Crossing Elimination Grant Program. What we would like to do, the deadline for this submittal is October 4th. We would like to get a letter signed by the authority supporting the grant, supporting the project. We think because of the regional funding that's been applied to it, that it makes great sense, and it should help a lot with the application when we submit it.
And this is not a match grant, all right?
That's correct. We are, it may be a 20% match, but we are going to be able to figure that out. We have been talking with DRPT, and the opportunity is there to fulfill that match.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chair, this is simply asking that we would support providing this letter of support.
Yes, ma'am, that is the case.
If a motion is necessary, I would certainly like to make that motion.
We have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Got a second, Mr. Carroll. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, so done.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item, 10B, is a general information item about on-call grant assistance. We were considering another grant opportunity, the Safe Streets for All program. The TPO discussed this and decided at its last meeting not to pursue a regional grant and to support 2 local grants for member jurisdictions. Even so, we think that it makes a lot of sense to have on-call support available through a consultant to assist with future grant opportunities through, as I mentioned, the bipartisan infrastructure law and other federal grants that are coming up. We have received some rough estimates from one consultant that we have been talking to over the past few months about what those fees might include. We are pursuing additional cost estimates from other groups, and we'll bring those back when available. But essentially, we would like to have the CVTA entertain supporting consultant support for future federal grant opportunities. And we are estimating that these fees would be able to be accommodated through the administrative and operating budget and would not impact local distributions or the regional funds.
Would this be administered through CVTA or through TPO?
The TPO functionality is not there because TPO operates on mostly federal funds, and we can't use federal funds to apply for federal funds. So the request would be for CVTA, if it is willing, to provide that financial support.
This is strictly an informational item at this point.
Simply an information item at this point. We don't have enough information yet to make a request.
Right. Any questions, Mr. Parsons, on the grant assistance?
Have we considered a part-time or full-time person with Plan RVA or TPO for this position? For this position?
We have not considered it specifically for this position. We are looking at options for filling our empty spots right now. And this is an aside, but most of the focus at this point has been on more of an engineer type position that can help with cost estimates and providing that resource. But we would certainly be happy to look at an additional support person that could fill this type of role.
So my understanding though is TPO being a federal mandated organization, it cannot apply for federal grants, is that what you're?
We're operating off of federal funds for most of our operating and staffing needs, so.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Then we go on from that to project selection allocation framework review.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Parsons, Ms. Clark, is Ms.
Yes,
Clark still with us?
I'll call Ms. Clark as much as she is available as well. The TAC has been, not to belabor this item, the TAC has been discussing over its last 2 meetings, possible updates to the project selection and guidance framework for regional projects. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the things that they've discussed is changing the cycle of when regional applications would be received to better match the smart scale 2-year window. So that is one of the things. I know Ms. Clark has prepared some comments based on the TAC report from Monday. So I turn the floor over to her.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. Nope.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. During the TAC meeting this past Monday, the members discussed extensively what we call parking lot items for the annual review update of the project selection and allocation framework. The first topic was regional funding cycle. The TAC did come to some agreement that having a regional funding cycle every other year would allow for the CVTA to know the outcome of the smart scale process, leverage future smart scale cycles, and allows during off-cycle time to review, adjust funded projects with scheduling, cost overruns, and cost estimate changes. In the funding cycle discussion, we also have for consideration of procedure is how to handle projects being submitted after application deadline has closed. So we do want to talk through like how would we recommend addressing that type of request. TAC discussed eligibility requirements. Every rural county expressed concern that in the future funding cycles, there would be a limited number of roadways eligible for regional funds. The TAC did not think that a separate scoring site criteria for the rural should be developed based on this one criteria, highway roadway category. TAC did discuss a special considerations category, which could take into account roadways that play an economic development, commuter route, or roadway that cross multiple jurisdictional boundaries. At this time, there was no consensus on the item, but it was discussed and will be discussed further. Another topic was project screening. TAC discussed that the process will have both third-party and VDOT to perform estimate validation for regional projects. And a note back onto the funding cycle, another reason for every other year, VDOT did let us know that when Smart Scale is in, they would not be able to perform these third-party estimates. And as a key issue, as we saw with the Goochland, for those projects that VDOT will administer, localities should seek out VDOT's estimate so that we can help to resolve the issue of the estimates not being validated by VDOT. The last 2 sections that we have on the list, but that we have not yet reviewed, are the project scoring and ranking and project selection. I can take any questions.
Questions for Ms. Clark?
Yes.
No questions. You did a very good job.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, other business, time for Ms. Firestone. Would you read the declaration for taking us into closed session, please?
Yes, just 1 second. I don't have that open. Hold on 1 second for me.
Mr. Chair, I can read what we have here and make it in the
Okay,
form of a motion.
that's
Okay,
fine.
I had that motion. I didn't know if there was further.
So, Mr. Chair, make a motion, we go into closed session on the Virginia Freedom of Information Act 2.2-3711A1, discussion of personal matters concerning Plan RVA employees and service to the authority under the memorandum of understanding for administrative and technical support services. In section 2.2-3711A, section 8, consultation with legal counsel regarding specific legal matters.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, motion second. All in favor of going into closed session, say aye.
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 I need you to host.
Okay, we are in closed session, and Dr. Newbill, you have access.
I need to come out, I think, and go into a different site, so I'll do that now.
Okay, we will await your return.
Pause the live stream and all of that, and I'm gonna start the closed session.
Mr. Pearson, you're okay? Dan, right?
You need to be here.
All is well.
Just checking.
Recording somebody's live is